Welcome to the panel Investing in Green Building Technologies, Maximizing Returns, Minimizing Environmental Impact. I'm Fabian König, Investment Manager at PropTech One Ventures. We are an early stage VC fund focused on transformative technologies in the built environment. And I'm really happy to be here today on this panel. So we are still in like a midst of a financial crisis, but at the same time, like a fundamental societal green transformation, which brings up quite a big challenge, but at the same time, opportunities. And it's a great pleasure to discuss this really interesting field of tension with my great group of panelists. So yeah, I would propose we start with a quick round of introductions. Starting with Kate.
Hello everyone. My name is Katarzyna Wszola, and I'm the Director of Innovation in Veolia, Poland. And I have the pleasure to implement different solutions with our partners here in Poland.
Hi everybody, Jonathan Cohen, Senior Partner and Director of Building Consultancy for Colliers, Poland. For those who don't know Colliers, we're one of the leading global real estate advisory businesses. We, in Poland, provide services not only to real estate clients, but also within the energy sector.
Thanks. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Conan Lauterpacht. I'm a partner at Sustainable Future Ventures. We're a venture capital fund focused on investing really at the intersection of the built environment and decarbonization, climate tech, call it what you will. We invest from late seed to Series B and invest throughout Europe and North America.
We do exactly the same. I'm Andreas Winter Extra, partner at Kompas. We are an early stage investor in the built environment, manufacturing and supply chain. We focus on decarbonization, digitalization. We do this across Europe, Israel and the US, and very happy to be in this panel.
Thank you for the introductions. So to begin, I'm specifically looking at the investors in this rounds. Conan and Andreas, from your perspective, what are some key trends and innovations in the green building technology sector that investors should be aware of at the moment?
I might just ask one question of the audience first of all to get a sense of how to target this. How many of the audience are technology investors? Just raise your hand if there are any. Okay, a few. How many are startup technology companies? About the same. And how many are technology buyers? Okay, a mix. Fine. In that case, a few of the key trends, which I'm sure everyone will be aware of, we're talking about retrofit as the biggest challenge we face in the built environment, whether we're talking about residential or commercial, and there are multiple solutions to that. And then flowing from that, you have the materials space, and then you have technology hardware, and then technology software. All of those are key components of it. I think when you ask the question, what's important for investors, I suppose I asked the question, what sort of investor? Which is what led to that question. Are we talking about real estate investors who are buyers and have these problems and are faced with these problems? Are we talking about technology investors, venture capital investors like ourselves, who are looking like what is a problem and also what is a space where we can generate venture capital returns? And the answers are different, because for a couple of those sectors, and I think particularly about things like material innovation, potentially have huge impact from a decarbonization standpoint as people innovate in net zero materials. But to be frank, challenging, at least we have found it challenging to find investments in the space that work from a venture capital standpoint. That is not to say that's not a good space for businesses to operate in. It's just a very challenging space to raise venture capital money from, because the questions we ask ourselves are, how much IP is in here? How defensible is this material innovation? And if it is defensible and there's real innovation, how does it go to market and how does it compete against the large incumbents that are there? And often we come to the place which, like, that is a very interesting innovation, but as it gains scale, will it be sufficient, or will someone produce a similar product? And if you are large in materials incumbents in the space, ultimately they produce something similar, and then you don't have the market access that you would otherwise. So hugely important space, very interesting, tough for us as technology investors, even ones that are investing at the intersection between built environment and sustainability. So if anyone's going to do it, it should be us. Hard to invest in. Where I think we have found interesting spaces around the edges, when we think about the coming together of reduction in operational carbon and net zero transition, together with retrofit, there is a huge potential there, and we see that whether it's looking at rollout of residential and small-scale solar and other forms of renewable, or whether it is looking at innovations in the heating and cooling space, which I think first and foremost everyone will think about heat pumps, actually seeing new and novel ways which they can be applied. So we have one company in North America. There they've innovated in a form factor of window mountable heat pump, which can be applied to existing multi-family buildings. So for all those buildings that have large furnace or fossil fuel-based heating or cooling, retrofit is a huge challenge because it's in multi-family or large apartment blocks. How do you actually electrify that? How do you install heat pumps? It's a challenging problem. And so there we found a solution where they had differentiated technology, but most importantly, a vast addressable market opportunity and something that was defensible. That's exciting from a technology investment standpoint. There is more I could talk about, but I might pause and let Andreas have the floor.
Thanks again. We are doing exactly this. No. So I fully agree with you. It's very hard to generate venture returns in materials. We have done 3 materials deals in the past where we were very convinced that the technology could actually provide a breakthrough. But market access and scaling that up and going global with that is a challenge. And I can't deny that. And as a venture fund, you need to balance it. But we made that decision to balance it between sort of materials, hardware, and software, because we thought that, climate change isn't solved with software alone. We won't be able to do this. And as you said, if we are not doing this, who else will do this? But at the same time, I think what I'm completely fascinated by is basically sort of the existing building stock and how we will decarbonize this and make it more efficient. And there's a massive opportunity waiting, and that will be driven both by regulation and by incentives. So some people will be forced, some people will be incentivized to do this, and identifying their sort of like the heat pumps opportunities in installation, opportunities in sort of new ways of delivering heat to buildings, which is accounting for most of the CO2, most of the energy demand that we have in existing buildings, and cooling is super interesting and a space to watch.
Thank you. Yeah, I think going forward, we can take on that kind of perspective of building owners and developers specifically, also considering all guests in this round. So now that we heard like what you think are the really key, interesting areas which will develop now, where you see the potential, Jonathan, what do you think are on the opposite the major challenges and obstacles when building owners and developers are facing currently? And do they actually genuinely care about green built technologies?
Okay, so obviously Colliers is ostensibly a B2B business, yes. So when I look at the clients that we're interfacing with, they typically fall into 4 groups, each with their own specific challenges. So if we look at those groups, obviously the first main group is business. So businesses need premises to operate, and they are principally focused on, first and foremost, ESG compliance. So head office will give a strategy. We need to be carbon neutral by 2040. We need to ensure that we comply with these parameters. And obviously, particularly in established markets, it's very difficult for occupiers to find premises which actually meet those targets today. Maybe in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, those buildings will be uplifted and meet those targets. However, where you're signing a lease for 5 years or 7 years, typically in this part of the world, you're not making that commitment to the building. From a landlord's perspective, I think the key challenges are uncertainty. First and foremost, you have a very, very dynamic, let's say, regulatory landscape. Yeah, every year there are new regulations in place. So in order to actually develop your strategy for the building, you need to second guess what's going to happen in the future in terms of regulation. You also need to try to blend that with your perceived anticipation of the tenants' requirements for the building. And obviously, institutional tenants from the US behave very, very differently, for example, to local startup businesses in Poland. Different expectations, different behaviours. In terms of energy companies, obviously, there's been a huge investment in photovoltaics in Poland. Wind farms have been challenged because of, again, a changing regulatory landscape. Only recently, the government enacted regulations which allow wind farms to be developed within 700 metres of residential buildings. That has, let's say, eased slightly the restrictions, but obviously there are very, very few places in Poland where you have good wind conditions and you have, let's say, no residential buildings. I think the fourth group are the banks and the financing institutions. Yeah, their challenge is that they're under, let's say, pressure to A, invest cash, but B, invest in product which meets their ESG criteria, taxonomy, and again today, very, very, very few buildings actually meet those criteria. So they're also having to compromise. Yeah, so I think they're the main challenges. The second part of the question was in terms of, I think...
Does it generally matter to them?
So obviously it matters on two levels, yeah? Obviously financially it does make a difference, yeah? You know, if you want, as was discussed in previous panels, if you want a real estate asset which is sustainable in terms of its longevity, in terms of its long-term value, with an exit that you can perceive in 10 years' time or less, then, you know, clearly you need to make sure that, as was previously discussed, you've got good quality tenants that are able to maintain steady cash flows, and at the same time, you need to achieve the ESG goals of the shareholders who are invested in the business.
All right, thank you. Building on what Jonathan said, Kate, what is your take on this?
Yeah, sure. So from the perspective of Veolia, it would be also interesting to add upon what you said, that some of you might know Veolia from as a global leader of ecological transformation based in France. We are operating within energy, water and waste. In general, globally, like the percentage of our business is into water and waste, and the energy sector is a smaller part of it all around the world. But the other case, actually the upside down, is in Poland. So for us, the majority of our business is in energy sector. And what I could add upon what was already said are two factors as well when it comes to those challenges. One would be related to the fact that in Poland and in Europe in general, after the First and Second World War and a post-communist time, there were a huge boom demographically, and we were facing the situation when we had to focus on the buildings and to make them really fast and operating for many people. So in Poland it is called Wielka Płyta, and those are the typical buildings that block of the slabs, so the prefabricated buildings that the condition is far from ideal. So when it comes to the energy efficiency and when it comes to the challenges that we are facing, it is not the fact that the technology is not there. It's because we have a lot of different types of technology that we could integrate, that we could work on. But actually the challenge here is the timing, that we need to focus on decarbonizing really, really fast. So it is not the fact only on technology side, but also on operations, on how we are going to implement it and how we are going to make it really effective and efficient. And the second challenge that I see is the fact that actually we are talking about different types of residents that could actually afford and that could not afford the proper living, the proper building a block of flats, like to buy them simply, because the price per square meter is constantly increasing. So there is a huge disequilibrium when it comes to people that could afford those new type of new equipped with new technologies, the buildings, but also we have people that could actually be doomed to face the situation, to either rent or to try to to find the different solutions. But it is a vast challenge for us to face, not only in Poland, in general.
I think, again, returning to some of the comments from earlier panels, in terms of existing building stock, particularly in the centre of the big cities, obviously you've got a mix of asset classes. You've got residential, you've got office, you've got retail, and in reality, it's not always so easy to generate the energy that's required on location. Yeah, you've got office buildings which have got relatively small roofs to the let's say gross usable area. The roofs are covered with rooftop equipment, so air handling units, chillers, etc. And it's just not feasible to generate on site all of the energy required. And what we're seeing, and what we've seen over the last couple of years now, is that despite the fact that there's a huge wish to invest in off-site energy, so we've got real estate investors who want to have either PPAs with external energy providers, or they would like to have their own land with a photovoltaic farm somewhere located remotely. Unfortunately, the infrastructure in Poland doesn't permit this. Yeah, the distribution network is aging, and in fact, most of the investments which are investigated by investors for wind farms or for photovoltaic farms are actually rejected by the networks because they simply can't handle the additional power on the network. Yeah.
Yeah. Really interesting insight. So now we heard quite a lot of challenges from you two, and also initially the opportunities. Building on that, Conan, where do you create a common ground between the different players in the real estate market? What do you see the key financial or also sustainability metrics to find a common ground between all people in this industry, especially from the perspective of real estate developers and asset owners?
I mean, I think if we're talking about financial metrics or really just financials, I think what's clear is that, to Kate's point, there are all these pressures increasing the cost of construction and therefore, let's say, residential accommodation, which increases the affordability gap. What we can't have is a scenario where the solutions, these decarbonization solutions, let's say, which are focused on, end up being materially more expensive than the traditional construction route. And so the question then becomes, like, how do you equalize? And that is a combination of regulatory or tax incentive, some form of carbon taxation combined with some form of incentive. But I think the reality is that we haven't reached that in all European countries yet. And I think it's interesting when you look at things like heat pump adoption by market and look at the gap, the spark spark gap, effectively the difference in price between electricity or say gas in those markets, and see the correlation between that and adoption, effectively where you have where gas remains significantly cheaper than electricity, you're not going to get that rapid adoption, even with incentive. And that's something you see in the UK, where there's good governmental incentive in the forms of grants for heat pumps, but actually gas still remains significantly cheaper than electricity, versus some of the Scandinavian countries where you have an outright ban on gas, which obviously drives adoption. And so it's I still think there's a large part that regulation, tax incentive will need to play in actually to drive the financial equalization that gets us to widespread adoption.
Okay. And Kate, building also on what Conan just said, what is the service sector and, as an example, also Veolia contributing to achieve those sustainability goals?
Yeah, sure. So we've been talking about decarbonization. So as you can imagine, when it comes to our installations and our whole sector all around Poland, we are focusing on like decarbonizing all the assets that we have to search for different materials to exchange with coal. But also, it is extremely important to have different kinds of scenarios. So, whenever we have a set strategy for whatever we are doing in Poland with our assets, we are reevaluating it constantly. So this is on the one hand side, but also operating as a company within water, energy, and waste. We see a huge potential when it comes to our influence and our obligation towards actually what could be done in order to preserve our nature and to work on the assets that we possess, and also be inspired by what is done all around the world, because it is not only our own assets, but Veolia is present all around the world. So that's from the global perspective. And when it comes to very concrete items related to construction industry, one of the fundamentals for us, fundamental topics, is the energy efficiency. So within that, we are having a bunch of different parts of solutions, because it is not a product that you could take from the shelf. It is always the situation to be adopted to particular type of building, particular type of partner that we're working with. And we are creating also different types of products, like building energy services provided to our housing cooperatives in order to manage the buildings in a proper way, to collect the data and to manage them in a more efficient way. We are doing different parts of innovation approaches to energy efficiency, cooperating with housing cooperatives in order to build the prototypes and proof of concepts to verify how we could be the integrator of different parts of technologies, of the heat pumps together with photovoltaics, etc. And right now we are having 4 pilot implementations in our housing cooperatives, so 3 in Poznań and 1 in Łódź. So those are different types of integrations, and we are collecting the data and verifying that. And also providing different types of business models for our customers as well. I mean here the ESCO model for the long-term cooperation with partners, because especially when it comes to mention the prices for heat pumps, it is not the equipment that you could take from the shelf, and it is going to be very cheap. But it needs to be adopted and addressed in a proper way to particular type of building. So we are supporting our housing cooperatives as well with that. And the bunch of different projects, topics that we are covering when it comes to the energy efficiency. And we take into consideration not only the energy sector, the energy part, but also trying to conserve, to preserve the water, to work on the circular economy as much as we could, to reuse, and to integrate into that into the whole system. So, bunch of different approaches to address this topic, because it is the crucial point for us. It is like the first point of interest for us to to integrate different types of technologies in order to make it as efficient and effective as possible.
Yeah, so in the end, it really also comes down to how various stakeholders play together in this area. Jonathan, as we're also running short, ideally trying to keep it as short as possible, what do you think, how can collaboration, building on that also between investors, developers, technology providers, provide a crucial role in the further adoption of green building technology?
That's a difficult question to answer. I think progress is more likely to be made through implementation of technologies which already exist, through partnership between landlords and occupiers. And the reason I say that is that I think there's an inherent, what's the word I'm looking for? Inertia, let's say, with investors to use new technologies. We've had a situation on a building which Colliers is managing where a new technology was proposed. This is a technology which uses, instead of water and glycol as the coolant in the building, water with aluminium particles. And this has better, let's say, technical parameters. The manufacturer is able to demonstrate that obviously it can increase efficiency of existing equipment on the roof. Everything looked great, but the investor said, "I don't want to implement this. You know, is it going to impact my guarantees on the equipment? You know, and what if it goes wrong?" Yeah. So basically, you know, until somebody else demonstrates that this is provable and workable and risk-free, there's always going to be an inertia on the side of developers and investors to utilize technology which they perceive as being potentially risky. Yeah. So I think that when I spoke earlier about, let's say, different challenges for different types of investors, I think that if you can have collaboration between occupiers and long-term landlords, if you consider that you know the target is for Poland to be carbon neutral by 2050, which is just, let's say, not quite 30 years away. Yeah, you look at the average lease terms which have been signed for buildings in different asset classes, which today range from 5 to 10 years. Yeah. I think that if you're going to implement investments in aging assets, for example, an office building which is 15 years old, yeah, you can, you know, look at the HVAC equipment and say, okay, this is now 15 years old. In the next 5 to 10 years, it needs to be replaced. We can replace with this type of heat pump, which will improve efficiency. We can change the facade. Yeah, the facade is a much more costly, much more iterative exercise. You can only do that second type of investment if you've actually got buy-in of the occupier, and that requires a much longer commitment than occupiers are currently making. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So again, if you look at how the industry has worked up until now, yeah, you've had occupiers relocating quite frequently. Yeah. Certainly in this part of the world, because of the supply of new product, it's been very often the case that companies will sign a 5-year lease. In 5 years' time, they'll relocate to the next building developed by the same developer. Yeah, and they just move constantly. That can't be sustainable. Yeah. So I think, again, you know, changing the mindset of occupiers to make longer-term commitments to buildings has to be the key. Yeah.
Yeah, long-term commitments and outlook is, I think, also quite a big keyword. Building on that, Andreas, where do you see in terms of regulatory and policy changes where the green technology investment landscape is evolving into, and what do we need to prepare for based on your future outlook?
Well, there are a couple of key trends, and most of them are sort of around energy optimization. So going to electrify heat generation is sort of the main driver, then optimization, then making sure that the energy that we use is carbon-free as much as possible. And then around that, you have sort of secondary sort of, okay, optimizing the overall building envelope and so on. That will come. the thing is, and maybe I want to turn this question around a little bit, and what has happened here is something, this discussion is something that I have seen before in the automotive industry where I grew up professionally. Regulation is often seen as a threat, but it's actually your friend, because regulation levels the playing field. So what happens is that as long as you don't have any regulations, you have sort of different standards from building to building. Everyone sort of tries to do their best, but they are always constantly afraid of being undercut by sort of the next building over, because they are not implementing all the ESG thingies that are so expensive, and so they can offer you a cheaper rent. If you have regulation, if you have a clear path, and you know in 5 years I need to be at point X, in 10 years I need to be at point Y, that makes it a lot easier to do investments, but it also levels the playing field and allows everyone to invest on the same terms. Automotive has done that, so automotive decarbonizes, everyone has to go electric, there are certain target dates, and contrary to what everyone believes, the automotive industry actually likes this a lot because it makes the investments possible. Before that, it was sort of, will people buy electric cars? Will people want different things? Now it's sort of like, we need to do this. And the same thing can apply also in the built environment.
All right, thank you so much. As we're running out a bit of time, I was planning to get some closing remarks, but before that, I was wondering if there's any questions from the audience.
Looks like we have at least one to begin with. Two questions, also in the middle back of the room. Yes, the lady was first, but okay.
Sure, you do her.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've mentioned obviously that Scandinavia, big shift away from gas by prioritizing energy. You mentioned also electric vehicles. China has managed to drive mass adoption of EVs by setting a line in the sand saying 50% by 2025, I think it is, and then 100% by 2030. It's an insane acceleration. That's often termed a burning of the boats strategy, saying there's no way back, you've got to take the land. What is the equivalent burning of the boats regulation that we need for transforming either construction or real estate to decarbonize?
I think Germany has shown an example, even though it's spectacularly failed in the public discussion, saying that, okay, you can't replace your gas boiler going forward. With another gas boiler, you have to go to a heat pump, which then spiked sort of people going to gas boilers and oil again, just to have a new gas boiler in there. But those are things that can work. Basically saying, okay, we won't have any gas. I think there's an initiative in Vienna. By 2030, they don't want to have any gas. Don't want to sell any gas anymore. And you need to do this. It's particularly brave when politicians implement this, and brave is something that they don't want to be because it's unpopular, but it needs to happen.
I think there's a key issue here of transition planning, yeah. And one of the points that was made earlier was that if we want to transition from gas to, let's say, gas heating to heat pumps, yeah. If the grid doesn't provide sufficient energy to power those heat pumps, then you've got no solution, right? So, it's not a case of simply regulating, saying no more gas boilers, yeah? You need to have the planning in place, the investment in place to actually facilitate those changes, yeah?
I mean, for me, I think it's enhancement of the beginnings of carbon taxation, because fundamentally, you're right, the infrastructure is not there. When we start thinking about electrification of everything, we hit the power grid as the primary blocker of it. There are technologies there that you can squeeze at the edges more, but fundamentally, they will require very significant capital investment. But until you can justify the return on that investment by demonstrating that there is effectively value to be gained, increased revenues, I think it's tough. And I think the interplay between all the factors becomes so complex, it leads to inertia. And so almost a phased introduction of carbon taxation, which we're beginning to see, is probably the only way to really move the needle.
And only 1 minute left for the second question, but please continue if you have comments to it.
All right. Any other comments from? Okay, then maybe.
So I was just going to add to the previous point that obviously energy pricing is a hot political potato, yeah, and obviously certainly in Poland we've seen over the last year or so artificial subsidies and things which are just again not sustainable, yeah. So I think this is also another important factor in terms of how we fund improving the network, because the distributors won't fund improving the network unless they're able to actually secure returns from end users, yeah?
All right, I think we're almost done. 15, do we get a few more seconds for a last question? Or?
If it's a quick question, please do.
Quick question.
Okay, so hi, Andres Mitnick, CEO of Strong by Form. As an entrepreneur, I cannot rely on regulation now changing the mindset of tenants to build a unicorn. So I feel like there are two players missing in this conversation, which are bankers and insurance companies. Because by providing better financial terms related to lower risk in projects, we could actually bring prices of new technologies at par with current technologies. And I was wondering, what was your take on how to bring those players to the table?
I mean, I think you're right. If we're talking about technology hardware, there's a real problem in Europe with, in fact, globally, but made worse in Europe because there's not the same level of public funding as there perhaps is in the US to provide things like debt finance to support hardware, if not hardware development, at least hardware scale up in terms of working capital and CapEx provision. It is something we've noted. It has forced us to invest in North American businesses more, where we're investing in effectively hardware heavy businesses because of that access to capital. It is a real problem, and one that we need to try and create ways for the financial markets to address globally, but particularly in Europe, where we still don't have the same level of public support.
All right. Thank you so much for the panelists to join me today. It was a great pleasure.